he's mistaking transgenderism with gender dysphoria. Transgenderism, the ideology that says that a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man as he describes it, is not true. It's not true for kids, it's not true for adults. You can't change your sex. The difference is yes, there are some kids who have gender dysphoria, and most of those kids grow out of gender dysphoria. When it persists into adulthood, then that adult has the right to make their own choices with their body and how they treat the mental illness that is gender dysphoria. So that's where the false dichotomy comes in. Welcome back to the channel today, everyone. So I am, as you see, I'm not in my studio, and as I always do, I forget to bring a good microphone with me, or this time it was just I don't have the cable to film, so excuse the audio a little bit. So I want to react to the Brad Polumbo Michael Knowles debate, which was supposed to be Michael Knowles and Dr. Deborah McCloskey, who is a trans woman, and they were debating, transgender ideology and what the government's role is in this. Now, I haven't watched this. Full disclosure, me and Brad are friends. I've worked with Brad, and so I kind of know what his positions are, and I believe that a lot of them are going to be very similar to mine. Whereas, as you know, I've been fairly critical of Michael Knowles on this channel. But I'm wanting to I want to see what they both have to say and where they both stand on some of these issues. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you. All right. There they are. I didn't know. I thought they might have been stuck outside. But we found them. Was that to them or to me? That was to them. Okay, it's confusing. See, I was under the impression that I was opening the debate, and then Brad would follow, and then we'd have rebuttals. But I guess there was an opening act that I was not.
I thought you meant to me in a joke.
No, certainly not. That hasn't been true in a while. All right. Well, as edifying as that lecture has been, I think we probably ought to get on with the debate. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking a few people. I want to thank Leah. I want to thank ISI. I want to thank my welcoming committee out there. I would especially like to thank Brad for pinch hitting after my original debate opponent withdrew. Brad came in at the last minute, and I really appreciate it. Professor McCloskey, who I was initially slated to debate, despite 3 degrees from Harvard, could not defend transgender ideology. He knew my views. We had chatted about them. He repeatedly expressed his desire to debate. Then at the last minute, he withdrew. I suspect he felt it more prudent to concede than to lose in front of C-SPAN's cameras. Even a distinguished scholar could not defend the indefensible. My opponent tonight has a more middle-of-the-road position than Professor McCloskey. Unlike Professor McCloskey, Mr. Polumbo does not believe that so-called trans women are really women. He has admitted that they're men. He doesn't think we should trans the kids. He opposes men in women's sports. But he does address men who identify as women as she and her.
So I don't know if that really is Dr. McCloskey's stance on transgenderism. I don't think that he's framing her position accurately. And she's obviously not there to defend her position, but she also dropped out of this debate, which was, like I said, it was disappointing to me to see her drop out of the debate because I think she would have been able to represent the position pretty well. I guess, Dr. McCloskey's fair game, as she was supposed to be the one that debated in this. But I don't think it's inconsistent. I think it's incredibly consistent to say that government shouldn't be involved. I think that's a misnomer to say that, we can treat people with respect because they have a right to live their lives however they want, and that, government is, not the end all be all. It seems like Knowles is taking the position that transgenderism is absolutely the ideology, is what we've said on this channel before. At CPAC, he framed it as transgender Trasgenderism needs to be eradicated for public life, which is kind of where this sets this debate up. I think the word eradicated was meant to, get clicks and views, and it was meant to get clicks and views and not the position that it was, because a lot of people took that as he wants to eradicate trans people, which I said at the time was just not the case, but it was the hyperbole of the statement that was going to draw attention to that.
Above all, though, my opponent believes the law should pretty much stay out of it. It is this last point that matters for tonight's debate. Even the most tolerant, open-minded, pluralistic society cannot simultaneously uphold mutually contradictory principles. In even the most liberal society, the law must answer at least certain basic questions. If the law has nothing to say about what a woman is, then the law has nothing to say at all. My opponent might suggest we leave it to private business to decide, but the practical implications of transgenderism extend far beyond private business. The bathroom issue keeps coming up because it is so clear and so instructive. It presents a conflict between two supposed rights: the right of women to have their own bathrooms and the supposed right of some men to go into the women's bathroom, thereby abolishing women's bathrooms. The law must pick a side. There is no neutrality.
I don't know if I discussed it very much on this show. That is absolutely false. Private businesses have the right to make the rules within their establishments. I advocate that when it comes to government-funded institutions, we do have a third space. But every privately owned corporation and company, they have a right to make the rules within their establishment, and you don't have to go there. It's as simple as that. Like, it's a free market solution. What Michael Knowles right now is advocating, or seemingly advocating, is that the government can tell private businesses what they can and cannot do, which is something that conservatives have long time, fought against.
Everybody, I want to say thank you to ISI for having us, and thank you to Michael for being willing to have this debate. And I would like to say to the people outside or inside, who are not just interested in having their voices heard, but in trying to shut down this debate, grow the hell up. The debate is happening, whether you like it or not. It's your choice to participate in it or bury your head in the sand. This is America. We have free speech, and I just don't really stand for anybody who would try to shut down the voices they disagree with rather than engage with them. Now, I want to
See, and this is the difference between actually doing something to get things done, and that's the free speech argument, right? So, like Brad just said, we may not agree with Michael Knowles on different issues, but these types of debates are very important. I'm not a huge fan of debates, but conversations on these issues are so important, because I think we can actually start to work together. Debates are good because when they bring the issues to the table, and you try to make your case. And then what those issues are is now the rest of us can kind of go back to the drawing board and work together. Like, okay, so this is the issue. This is your side. This is my side, and we work together to create solutions that work for everybody.
I want to start by pointing out something that might seem surprising, but I am a gay agnostic libertarian, yet I recently, or not too recently, found out that I have something in common with a Orthodox Christian conservative baker you might have heard of named Jack Phillips. You see, I met him a few years ago when he was the subject of a Supreme Court case because gay rights activists had harangued him into court trying to force him to bake a gay wedding cake. Then trans activists came and invented a gender transition cake and wanted him to bake that too. But when I met him, I realized we actually had much more in common than I had ever anticipated, because we both believe in pluralism, freedom of speech, and the general laissez-faire, live and let live idea of America, that we can have radically different worldviews and beliefs, but live in peace side by side, without either side trying to conquer or force the other side to bend the knee. But those activists who chased him into court, who harassed his business, harassed his family, drove away his customers, tried to use the force of the law to eradicate his beliefs, his bigoted and evil beliefs in their view. They do not. They reject America's classically liberal, pluralistic values. And unfortunately, I have to tell you that Michael Knowles and people of his intellectual ilk, they do too. They've unfortunately become essentially a right-wing version of those LGBT activists who seek to use the state to police how other people can live their lives and restrict them from living in ways they personally disapprove of. You don't have to take my word for it. Michael recently said at a speech I'm sure you're all aware of that we should eradicate transgenderism from public life. Now, to be fair to Michael, he was not, as some of his critics have mischaracterized him, calling for pogroms or for people to be killed. But what he was calling for, and what he has called for many times in many other places, is to ban transgenderism, to ban adults from receiving medical transition treatments, to ban adults from using preferred pronouns and names in public, to ban adults from accessing facilities that align with their outward appearance. And even in the case of transgender TikToker Dylan Mulvaney, who I will admit is pretty cringe, Michael has called for Dylan Mulvaney to be institutionalized. Now, I'm here to suggest that that totalitarian approach to debating social issues is fundamentally inconsistent with conservative principles of individual liberty, limited government, and the classically liberal society that conservatives in the U.S. have always wanted to conserve. But it's also remarkably short-sighted. About 30% of the United States identifies as socially conservative. So if we want to start having the majority rules approach of suppressing lifestyles you don't approve of shutting down ideas, of banning ideas and lifestyles that aren't in alignment with your values, that is not going to go well for my friends on the religious right.
That is such a good point. I did not know that the socially conservative movement was only 30% of the population. But it's again, like I've said this quite a bit, that the extremes kind of shape the perception of an entire group. We know that the majority of people, I've traveled the country, and the majority of people are, more live and let live people. I've never once had an issue in person. And so this whole notion that they are speaking for this vast majority of people, it's just not true. So if the government has the ability to eradicate transgenderism, for example, what's to say that they can't eradicate social conservatism as well? It's a double-edged sword, and that's why the government has no business in being involved. And so I also like the fact that Brad brought up the cake baker, because I've always supported his right to deny service. I've always said that the Supreme Court case was based on the wrong fact. They based it on his religious beliefs. But private businesses should be allowed to discriminate for whatever reason they want. It's their private property, and I don't know why you would want to support somebody who doesn't hold your ideals. And so I've always said when it came to him that, the left can go they can go to a baker that, that wants to bake that cake. There's plenty of them. There's more competition. That's why the free market works so well, is because it creates competition. I mean, look what the right does whenever anything happens if one of these, massive corporations like Hershey. The Daily Wire created a chocolate brand to counteract that. That is the free market at work. It's a beautiful solution, but they want to have their cake and eat it too.
I think we can reasonably and fairly discuss questions about medical, societal, and perhaps even governmental restrictions on things like children making decisions for medical treatments they can't really consent to, that could have life-altering consequences. I think we can protect rules that ensure fairness in sports where it's applicable. I think we can navigate these nuances without depriving our American adult peers of the right to live their lives how they see fit in accordance with their values. Because that's the test of freedom. It's easy to believe in freedom for the people you like. It's easy to believe in freedom for your friends, for the people on your team. But you have to believe in freedom for the people you don't like, the people that give you the ick. If you don't believe in freedom for anybody. And unfortunately, The approach that Michael Knowles and his ilk advocate on these issues is inconsistent with traditional conservative values of individual liberty, and it would ultimately set the stage for their own downfall. So we should take a pluralistic and classical liberal approach to these issues. Thank you.
So it's kind of like the gun control debate, right? So we talked about this before. You know, when they started to advocate for gun control for trans people because of their mental health issues, that how long before they, the left is saying, well, conservatism is a mental health issue and we need to control guns against them as well. It's the same thing. You advocate for your own demise once you start advocating to take somebody else's rights away for reasons as well. That is a slippery slope.
Thank you, Brad. I am shocked to hear that I'm not pluralistic. I consider myself very, very open-minded, as we all are in America, but on certain issues we cannot be totally open-minded. Because on some issues you see a conflict of rights and a conflict of claimed rights and a conflict of freedom.
What he's mistaking is that it is a trans rights, which I would argue there's no such thing as, and a women's rights issue. Because those two things conflict, it means that they're not actually rights. We use the term rights way too much. And so, again, I always advocate, like when it comes to like the bathroom issues, it's the private property owner's rights that are being infringed upon.
The American public's view on these issues is pretty nuanced, but I could also show you polls that say 60, 70% of Americans believe in anti-discrimination protections for transgender people. In fact, I think the eradicate transgenderism from public life position, even as Michael describes it, not as his critics do, is not going to poll high in America. And if all you have to offer to one extreme is the opposite extreme, you're actually making that opposite extreme more likely to succeed.
I'm curious both whether you think he's right and he should just be differently strategic in how he approaches it, and whether it's always ineffective to make an unpopular point plainly and honestly, or kind of as a feint.
It's both. I don't fully agree with Michael's positions, but also from a pure tactical position, I would say it's wrong to run on the opposite extreme. So you're not going to convince me that just taking the most extreme position because it's honest or because you believe it fully, it's naive if your goal is to actually achieve change. I'm also, of course, just coming at it from a fundamentally different premise in which, look, I believe there's two biological sexes. They are immutable. But there's a lot that we attach to gender that is social. And if someone like Blair White, who I consider an acquaintance and am friendly with, if she wants to live as a woman, have surgery as she has, if that's what will make her happy, and she struggled with deep depression and mental issues, and then that helped, why would I object to that? And moreover, why would I embrace some sort of one-size-fits-all government approach that would legally force somebody with C-cup tits to use the men's room and the boys' locker room? It doesn't make any sense.
I think the more concern you have for women, the less you should use the word tits on the stage. I mean it.
So I agree with Brad's point there. Why would you support government involvement in that?
I know that you think that when someone asks you to address them by their pronouns, their preferred pronouns, they're asking you to lie to them or be complicit in a lie. But that's clearly not the only time that you believe you're asked to lie in a pluralistic society. And I don't usually see you going to Episcopalian churches to tell them you don't believe they're offering the body of Christ.
I can escape from the Episcopalian church down the street, and I don't attend it. I can escape from many liberal Catholic churches down the street, by the way, for that matter, and there's no problem. Nobody's forcing me to attend. But on the question here, women will have bathrooms or they won't. Women will have sports teams or they won't. And I will engage in conversation with people because we live in a society. We're not atomized individuals, and no man is an island entire of himself. So when I am to refer to somebody, especially as a matter of public life, if I am not permitted to refer to him as him and her as her, I am being forced to lie in my regular everyday life.
So I do want to stop there because I want to just say that, well, one, I in a way agree on the pronouns issue. This is my stance on pronouns is that we shouldn't be forcing it. You know, we have freedom of speech. We shouldn't force people to use the pronouns. It's their right to not use preferred pronouns and all of that stuff. I don't know exactly what Michael Knowles' position is on this, but I do know that Ben Shapiro has told Blair White that he will, in private, with people that he likes and respects, use their preferred pronouns or the pronouns of how they present. But as a matter of principle, when speaking on these issues, he will not, simply because it takes away from his argument at the time. It was something very similar to that. And I'm okay with that. And, I would never try to force Michael Knowles or anybody to use, my preferred pronouns or anything like that. I think that's it is what it is. You can choose to associate or disassociate with people who choose to or not to, respect you.
I want to press you here because you're falling on the bathroom example
Yep.
when you've also talked about involuntary commitment. And I think on the spectrum of where the law intervenes, the bathroom is both kind of the least, charged issue to kind of fall back on, and saying at a certain point of delusion, I think someone who disagrees with you on this issue should be confined. I want to hear you defend that point rather than the bathroom access.
Well, I think that what's very important here is prudence. This is one of those forgotten virtues that people in our highly ideological age think that we need to have a manifesto written in 5 bullet points on a napkin to answer every question. But for example, if someone is a man who has fallen into the transgender rabbit hole, and for him it is, as it historically has been for pretty much everybody, a sexual fetish, a paraphilia of cross-dressing that is largely driven by pornography today. But that man still understands that he's a man. This is just a little weird thing that he does at home, and it makes him have a thrill, and okay, fine, we live in a fallen world. I wouldn't suggest we need to commit that man. But there is a spectrum here of irrationality and insanity. Let's call it what it is. And so if a man is convinced that he really is a woman, like in some of those viral videos we've all seen of the big burly man screaming in the bodega, my name is ma'am, and he's acting out in a way that is really disorderly and disrupting the public and harmful to himself. For instance, if he wants to chop off his own healthy body parts and cause all sorts of destruction to himself, then I think not only is it the right of society to take some action here to restore order, but I think it's only compassionate for that person.
That is so. So the moderator does a great job on this issue and pushes back to say, you're going to an issue like the bathroom issue is so low on most people's worry list, but Michael Knowles has made extreme statements about committing people. Yes, there are a very select few people who will say that they are actually a woman, but the vast majority of transsexuals don't even say that. We know the difference between our biology and what our mental illness that is gender dysphoria has. He writes the vast majority of us off as if we're just these cross-dressing fetishists, which is not the case with just about anybody that's been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Those are cross-dressers. They do it in their own home. But what he's alluding to is that he doesn't believe that we should be able to, be who we are, take hormones, and express who we are in public life. He wants us to not be, live how we want. He wants the use government to commit us for that.
Moment, yes, absolutely.
Can you explain, Michael, why you want the government to be the arbiter of truth, to decide what beliefs? I mean, I've lived through the government tell us there were WMDs in Iraq, lie to us every which way about COVID, and you are saying that the government and the people that run it should be an arbiter of truth and then should involuntarily commit and basically lock people up who don't meet their perception of the truth. Can you explain to me, as a matter of prudence, how that could possibly be a good idea.
Well, I'm not saying that the government is the arbiter of truth, of course not, but we have civil authority to establish and to enforce laws. And so we can either establish and enforce laws on the basis of pure will, a man who says, I very much want to be a woman, and so that's what we're going to do, completely divorced from reality and the moral order, or we can establish and enforce laws as a matter of interpretation, to believe that there is such a thing as objective reality and a moral order and a natural law that we are then translating into the civil law.
It's a great point that Brad makes, because that's the crux of the whole issue. The government is not a good arbiter of civil rights and liberties. The government simply wants to take away all of our rights and liberties, and they lie to us all the time. So no matter who you have in government, they're going to take it away, which, as Brad said in his opening statement, that if it's the government taking away, claiming that social conservatism is, not morally right and should be eradicated, then they are going to be the arbiter of that. So it's fundamentally flawed argument from Knowles that the government should, act in these certain ways when they have the power. It's also what's flawed about the left so much as they try to use the government force against, conservatism, and then they get mad when, the GOP uses the same rules that they created against them. It doesn't, you can't argue against one and for the other and not expect it to come back at you.
The law will say something, inevitably. The government is not some foreign entity. We live in America. We have some say in our government, even still today. And the law must necessarily say something. Either the women get... the reason I keep going to the bathrooms is because it's just so clear, but you can use the sports teams, you can use...
I think the involuntary commitment one is relevant, though, because I think, this is not the level of force that Mr. Polumbo is worried about as worried about bathroom
I suppose...
rules.
Right. I mean, bathrooms are smaller scale, but what I would say is that these issues are complicated, and they should be decentralized. Let a business decide their own bathroom policies. I've been to a lot of places in liberal cities that solve this by having single-stall unisex bathrooms. Fantastic. Don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. But what we're talking about here is essentially saying, well, we think somebody has deluded and wrong beliefs, so they should be locked up. I mean, that would have gotten that's the approach that had people wanting to lock up and kill Galileo, for daring to suggest that the Earth was not the center of the universe. I don't think we all know the truth. That's part of the process of discovering the truth. And let me just say, and I'm not saying this, but a large swath of the country thinks that the Catholic faith, believing in a God, is a deluded belief, is a delusion. Should they want to have you committed?
No, the majority of Americans still believe in God. Well, I would just like to correct you, Leah. You've said that I've had varying degrees of confidence in the scientific studies. I have no confidence in any of them. I'm just citing them because they back up my argument.
What would you actually like to see studied? I mean it.
Again, he's only citing them because they back up his argument, even though he doesn't believe that they're accurate. That is an insane way of being and entirely hypocritical. He's basically admitting that his studies he doesn't believe that his studies are accurate, but he'll use them no matter what. As long as they back up his argument, he's going to use them.
Right? Like,
kudos for honesty.
It's true. I would most like to see this issue studied not through biology and not through some bizarre sociology course in a gender studies department, but through anthropology and through ontology and through philosophy. Because ultimately what this comes down to, I'm happy that all the scientific studies back up my view, but I wouldn't really care even if they didn't. Because the question is, what is the human person? The claim of transgenderism, it keeps moving, but the claim basically is that one...
The studies don't actually just back up your views, okay? There's studies that, trans activists can cite all these studies on the other side. That's the problem with them, is there's not enough studies to actually show, what's beneficial and what's not. I can tell you personally that transitioning helped me feel more comfortable. I will say that to that end, I think that it's being sold as this idea that it's this magic cure. It's not. Your life doesn't always get better. In fact, sometimes in some aspects of your life, it gets harder. And some would argue that it gets harder because of the stuff that Micro Knowles is proposing. Why would my anxiety might go up if I think that people want to commit me to a mental institution because I transition. I don't believe that I'm biologically a female. I don't believe that in the notion that, you can be trapped in, a or a girl trapped in a boy's body or a boy trapped in a girl's body. That's a false notion. But they use this because there's some minority of activists who say this stuff. But they're buying into this postmodern ideology, which again goes back to, I guess, what Michael Knowles is saying about transgenderism. And again, as Brad's pointed out, who is government to tell anybody how they can or cannot live their lives if it's not hurting anybody else?
The question that we're asking here is, what is a man? What is a woman? And I am not happy with even the conservative answer, which is a woman is a womb and 2X chromosomes. I don't know what 2X chromosomes are. If you told me that a woman is sugar, spice, and everything nice, that to me is a much more precise description and accurate description of what a woman is. So I'm happy to have those conversations.
But I don't think that is the question. I think the question is who gets to decide. If
Well,
you would have the government decide for everyone, and I would have people decide for themselves in their own laws. You're either an adult or you're not. And once you're an adult, you have the full freedoms and rights and responsibilities that come with our society. And that should include living your life in a way that traditionalist conservatives don't approve of, think is wrong, think is gross, think is bad. But for minors, I think it is fair to talk about not nearly enough safeguards on this care. I question whether they can even consent to it at all.
For all of human history, pretty much no one has thought that the transgender idea really is true. And you don't seem to think that it really is true. It's interesting.
Well, I think I view it different. I have a different definition of it.
But here's the inconsistency that I find in your point. You say that when you turn 18, you ought to be able to chop yourself up and put on a dress and go into a women's bathroom. And putting aside the public issues that come from that, I just wonder how it is the case that transgenderism is false for the first 18 years and then suddenly becomes true when one turns 18. And if that is not what's really happening, if it is false and your trepidation in exposing children to this is because it obviously is false, if it's false and harmful for children, why is it beneficial and true for adults? Shouldn't we apply an even standard across the board and come to a conclusion?
So you often set this up as a dichotomy, but I think that it either has to be true for all or false for all. I think it's a false dichotomy. I think the issue is children cannot fully consent to the full consequences of a life-altering medical procedure. We're not even talking about social transition. I think if you have a persistent gender dysphoric 13-year-old, and you want to have them socially transition, I think that's up to parents. Conservatives were just screaming yesterday about parental rights. I'm fine with that.
But not parental wrongs.
You should have the right, with only very, very high exceptions in extreme cases, to parent your kids rightly or wrongly. And it's not badly or well, except for extreme cases of abuse.
So I'd actually like you to draw that out for a second.
So Brad does a pretty good job of answering the question. What Michael Knowles is mistaken in this area is he's mistaking transgenderism with gender dysphoria. Transgenderism, the ideology that says that a man can become a woman or a woman can become a man as he describes it, is not true. It's not true for kids, it's not true for adults. You can't change your sex. The difference is yes, there are some kids who have gender dysphoria. And most of those kids grow out of gender dysphoria. When it persists into adulthood, then that adult has the right to make their own choices with their body and how they treat the mental illness that is gender dysphoria. So that's where the false dichotomy comes in.
I'm asking about a little, how are you thinking about what a parent can and cannot consent to on behalf of their child?
I think the same way a parent cannot consent to sex on behalf of their child. There's obviously a level of physical maturity you have to reach before you can make potentially life-altering decisions about your body. And so something like raising your kids Catholic, well, if your kid grows up and wants to become Jewish or an atheist, they can't undo a bottom surgery, right? Not really. So that's why I draw that distinction. And I would just say, to Michael's point that it either has to be true for everyone or false for everyone, first off, we're talking about the government as an arbiter of truth or not, but also we can have different standards for kids and adults. You can't get a tattoo as a child. You can't drink. You can't buy a gun. You can't go into our movie. You can have different standards. It's a false dichotomy.
You can take hormones if your parents worry you're too short. as a child. And I'm curious whether you think that's something parents should consent to. Doctors will give you growth hormones if you're projected to be short enough that they worry it will impact your quality of life.
Yeah, I think there's a very different between...
And it's permanent, it's not undoable.
Between that
the child
and, for
can
example,
kind of only
like,
guess so much what it's like to be an
precocious
adult.
puberty, right? When sometimes you'll have a rare case where a 7-year-old will start going through
So
puberty.
I want to unpack the difference between these two. Precocious.
So one thing about this, so she actually makes a decent point, okay? And Brad's point about precocious puberty are very separate. So her point that yes, if you are not tall enough, or you're not within a certain percentage, and you're not tall enough, and usually with males, they will give you human growth hormone to stimulate that growth, so that you will be like an average height. I know personally, actually, this is kind of funny because my parents decided not to pursue that route with me because I was below average height for a male. I'm glad they didn't. I'm really glad that they didn't decide to go that route because now I'm able to pass better. I'm only 5'4". I'm the average height for a female, and I'm small. I have the average height, shoe size, the average hand size, like small, everything like that. And so if they had gone that route, I would be a much bigger, and it would be harder for me to pass. So I'm happy my parents didn't. I don't think that, I don't think it's right for parents to, I don't think parents should put their stuff on that. Now, precocious puberty is something that's different, whereas precocious puberty can actually be very harmful to a child's body. It's not just something as arbitrary or something as, vain, I guess, as height, but precocious puberty can actually be harmful. And so I think that that issue there that Brett points out, it's not an equivalent. And again, I'm glad my parents didn't do that.
Do you think parents should be able to consult to growth hormones on behalf of their child when they're told their child will be very short?
I would say if there's not going to be like life-altering harm and consequences for it, yes. But I mean, the difference is like if you go through gender transition as a minor and never go through your natal sex as puberty, you often lose fertility for life. That's not quite the same thing as being a few inches taller or not.
Interestingly, the pitch is often, in some sense, about preserving future fertility insofar as the doctor worries being too short will inhibit your ability to find a spouse.
Well, that's a whole other issue.
All right. Mr. Knowles.
Brad makes a good point there, though, after the fact. I still don't think, it's not the same. And actually, delaying puberty can have life-altering consequences. So they both do the same thing. Actually, if you delay puberty, you may not be as tall as you would normally be. So it's kind of the opposite thing, but it's kind of interesting. But that is a kind of interesting and funny point there at the end. I like that.
It would seem to me that what transgenderism is proposing is an anthropology. It's an idea about what human nature is. And so if it is true, then it is true for children, and I'm not using this to suggest we get rid of transing the kids. Ultimately, I think that, of course. But if it's true, then it would seem to me very cruel to prevent a child from transitioning, especially before puberty. Because if you can suppress a child's puberty, and then you can put them on cross-sex hormones, and then you can have the little boy look more like a little girl, he is going to much more successfully pass as the opposite sex than if he were to be put on these kinds of hormones and have these procedures much later. It would be much more expensive, it would be much more painful. And so if transgenderism is true, then I think we have to trans the kids.
So this again is, falsely saying that, again, using the word transgenderism and the way that Michael's using it is not, it's not accurate as to what we're saying. Like, the problem is you can't determine which one of these kids will actually grow up to have, persist in their gender dysphoria when all the studies are showing that, 80 to 90% would grow out of it. And that is the real issue with transing the kids, not is transgenderism, this ideology, true.
Would you say to a parent who says, I want to take care of my child, everything I see in my child's behavior, not just in what they tell me, but in the way they act when I address them in one way or the other, when I put them with one group of kids or the other, tells me they're happier this way and uncomfortable the other, but you say I can't do this till they're 18. Why?
Well, to clarify, I'm okay with them socially transitioning.
So one thing actually about like Brad talking about social transitions though too, one area where people mistake is that social transitions are somehow are a zero sum game. Social transitions are not a zero sum game. They don't always lead, they generally, the kid will, socially transition and then grow out of it. But I did write the article about the sunk cost fallacy. When people start to go along with this new gender identity, you start down this road of down this road of investments, but it doesn't really take hold. And so I'm okay with social transitions, but we need to acknowledge that they are not a zero sum game. There is an investment that happens, and it does start that process of a sunk cost fallacy that happens with trans people.
But I think you know that that's not always where people want to stop.
I agree.
Right? So what would you say to that parent?
The reason that is not appropriate is that child is too young to really consent to the life-altering possibilities of that, but two, it's actually the process of going through puberty as your natal sex that often causes gender incongruity to desist. So the problem is that now they go on puberty blockers, then they do cross-sex hormones. They never actually go. That's why previously, decades ago, when you had gender incongruent youth, many of them grew up to be gay men or lesbian women. And that was because when they went through their puberty, they reconciled their gender. They realized the things they were feeling didn't mean they were actually
trapped in the wrong
body.
Is there a point after a certain trial of puberty where you'd feel comfortable with a minor transitioning?
Well, I have also said that, I think the age of consent should be 18, but in some states it's 16 or 17. It would make sense to me then that in those states you could also transition gender at 16 or 17. But I don't know exactly where to draw the line.
So, I mean, I agree and disagree with Brad's point there. I have in the past advocated for this to be an age of consent issue as to where, the state draws the line at the age of consent. Unfortunately, we are having parents manipulated, and we're also having, children are being very manipulated. And so, we see a lot of adults getting, trapped in this ideology because their therapist pushed it on them and lied that it would be this magic cure. So I think that, under the age of adulthood, it's, which is 18, like you have the issue of medical professionals not providing proper care in those instances. And so I think I've said this before, is that until we can clean up the medical industry and they're not perpetuating this harm on people, then we have to set it at the age of adulthood. And then once we get it to that point and we can, figure out what's going on, then we can start to look at, how do we determine, children that this will actually benefit. In the Lisa Littman study, it was that, 80% desisted by the age of 16. And so 16 was always a good age to kind of set that marker. But now that's not the case. And so we need to reevaluate. And then we can, I think we put it at 18 right now, and then we reevaluate in the future. Like I said, I kind of disagree with Brad in that sense, just because I've seen how the medical industry has manipulated this so much in recent years. So that's where I disagree.
I don't believe the government should be in the business of banning false ideas. And also, the average federal bureaucrat has the politics of Elizabeth Warren. And I know you can cite noble things about self-government, but the truth is we have a bloated bureaucracy that does not represent the American people. It is an entrenched political class with politics much different than yours. So the idea that we're going to make that government the arbiter of what ideas are true and false and ban or eradicate some ideas as a result of that seems to me not just a bad idea on principle, but incredibly short-sighted.
Well, because while I agree with Brad's point that we have far too many bureaucrats on the federal payroll, the recent upending of laws concerning sex and gender have come from elected and appointed officials.
But now we're seeing laws like in Portland or in Oregon and Washington and California and Colorado and I believe Montana and other states across the country that are becoming sanctuary states that are pushing the exact opposite ideas of what Michael Knowles is pushing here. These states are becoming the full arbitrary of transgender ideology because, like Brad points out, they have the political background of Elizabeth Warren. Not very well.
What is the good of being free to think?
To explore and find the best ideas in part, but also to fulfill the human experience. That's what life is learning and making your way through the world and deciding what you believe. And if you're not free to think and you're not free to speak, you're not able to do that. So it's like the idea of, for example, coerced morality isn't really morality, right? Because
as the size of government has grown, so has the acceptance of alternative or degenerate lifestyles on a systemic scale. Culture and the legal system reflect this. How can you recognize this fact while believing that simply using the state to fight this behavior in the legal system will lead to the necessary cultural change to eradicate it from public life?
Well, the government hasn't just grown. I guess that's the misconception at the heart of this. Yes, obviously we're a much bigger country now, 330 million people. The federal government is much more powerful than it was some 200 years ago. But in other ways, the government has weakened. In other ways, the ability of local governments to control their own communities and set standards, that's weakened considerably. The ability of school boards to set curricula now is quite controversial. The rights of states have completely gone away.
The school made headlines last year for their implemented pronoun mandate, saying that if students told you what their pronouns are and you didn't abide by that you can get in trouble through administration. Private university, how do you recommend not only fighting back against that rule, but having students who are mainly liberal on that campus kind of see your side of that argument?
The university is obviously very liberal, and so they probably buy into all sorts of student governance kind of silly policies. So you could try to get some power and wield it that way. But as you point out, it's a school. It has the right to set its own standards, especially as a private university. It can do that. And so ultimately, if you can't persuade the administration to do it, you might have to seek out a community that's more reasonable and that very likely will provide you with a better education if the school that you're attending doesn't know the difference between men and women.
Yeah, I think I agree with Michael. They're a private school. They can have stupid anti-free speech policies if they want, but I think you should transfer.
I fully agree. Look, we all agreed on something. At least we can agree on something in this debate. Like, we can fully agree that government doesn't have a right to come in and censor the speech or tell a private university what to do. That's great. That's what these debates are for.
At what age what age should we define as when one becomes an adult, and should it then be allowed to ban this type of surgery up until that age, or just ban it entirely?
Even once one reaches those ages of maturity, the question is, can certain behaviors be banned? And the answer for all of American history, including today, is yes.
Yeah, so I think the question is not so much can we or can we not restrict this. It's should we? And I would just say, do you want your own life restricted? Do you want government officials writing rules about what clothing you're allowed to wear? I mean, I think of it, the COVID experiment reminded to me the importance of bodily autonomy and medical freedom. I don't understand how people can, on one hand, and I'm assuming some of Michael's positions here, but rail against COVID vaccine mandates, be outraged that the government would tell you you have to take an injection, and I was, but then also think the government should be able to tell you whether or not you can take testosterone pills.
All right, so overall, I mean, obviously, this kind of lived up to exactly what I thought it was going to be. I don't necessarily I obviously don't agree with Michael Knowles on very much of anything. Brad, who's a good friend of mine, who's a fellow libertarian who I've worked with in the past, has he raised the issues as I would have seen him raise the issues. Now, when it comes to debates, I don't like them because I think there's a winner-loser scenario. I'm not going to say who won this debate because that is in the eye of the beholder, which, who am I? I mean, I think that, Brad makes the points that I would have made. So, but I don't think that there's it's going to be a clear winner or loser. It really just depends on, what side of the aisle you're on or if you're a libertarian or a socially conservative as to what side you do. I really don't think that many, like what they've talked about here is going to move the needle in the social space, in the culture war in and of itself. I just don't. I think that this was a pretty, in all honesty, it was a pretty cookie cutter debate on values. I do like it because they both promoted their ideas as exactly as they are, and so people can look at their ideas and then judge for themselves as to which ideals are better for them. You have Brad, who thinks that the government is a large evil entity. I paraphrasing, obviously, and so he doesn't want that person to be able to control other people's, what people do with their, with their bodies, or he wants people to be free to make mistakes and all that stuff. Michael Knowles doesn't agree with people. He wants to use government, who he admits is flawed and has taken much power away from people, but he wants to use that same government to meet his ends, without realizing that government in and of itself will end up coming for his ideas, as we've seen them do um, recently. I mean, they want to come for guns, they want to come for guns, they want to come for all this stuff. So I obviously agree with Brad a lot more than Michael Knowles. I like I like these conversations because you can go in, you can listen to what they have to say, and you can choose whether you agree or disagree. And I think that then now we can go and back and have the nuanced conversations about this. So, but with that, let me know what you think in the comment sections. Click that like and subscribe button. Support me across all social media platforms, and I will see you next time.